Computer, yeah, there it is. Yeah, here we are. Well, hello everyone. I have the honor of interviewing Scott Horton, who is a writer and a blogger and runs a podcast. We'll be focusing on his book about nuclear war, the risks thereof, and nuclear disarmament. It's called Hotter in the Sun. There, he interviews a lot of experts in the field, including people as illustrious as Seymour Hirschman and Elsenberg, who of course wrote The Doomsday Machine. So, Scott, I'm going to ask you to, first of all, what inspired you to do this set of interviews and then edit it into a book? Well, first of all, I should introduce yourself, first of all, a little bit about your background, and then we'll go into that.
It's okay. Yeah, sure. I'm just a Ron Paul, anti-government libertarian type from Texas, and
Mhm.
I specialize in foreign policy, I guess. I've been running around with antiwar.com, where I'm now the editorial director. I've been running around with those guys for about 20 years now. I've done
Cool.
6,000 interviews on my show over the time, and
Hmm.
I've written a few books about the terror war and now about the Cold War with Russia. And then that book
Hmm.
that you held up there, Hotter Than the Sun, that's a compilation of interviews that I did, as you say, there over the years. And in
Hmm.
fact, what happened was just a friend of mine said, "Hey, look at me and what I did." And he had just put together a compilation of transcripts on the subject of nuclear war of interviews that I had done over the period of time. I
Hmm.
went through and edited. I threw out some and had him add a few more and switched it up a little bit and put that out, I think, in the summer of 22. Uh,
Hmm.
I was in the middle of writing my book, Provoked, about the new Cold War and the war in Ukraine. And then I thought, well, I
Yep.
want to get my last word out here about nuclear war before it kicks off. So at least I can
No kidding, yeah.
moment before I turn to ash. Um,
Hmm.
so went ahead and put it out, and then so what it is, the title is provocative and maybe to a fault, right? The title is Hotter Than the Sun: Time to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, which in my previous two books are Time to End the War in Afghanistan and Time to End the War on Terrorism. So I'm kind of keeping
Hmm.
the theme, but I could have just as easily made the subtitle just all about nuclear weapons in this day and age or something like that because
Right.
not really a call to abolish nuclear weapons. That's not really what the book is about. I just wanted to wedge that into the title because that's what I want to see. And
Oh,
there's
ditto here.
some talk about it, but the book is about essentially it's about America and Russia's nuclear arsenals as well as China and Israel and North Korea. Um,
Hmm.
we have plenty on how Iran ain't making nuclear weapons, but they just might if we pushed them hard enough. And we've got then there's whole sections on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There are whole
Hmm.
sections on um, disarmament, and then the peace activists who work and focus on nuclear weapons. Um, there's quite a bit of talk about how America helped to proliferate nuclear weapons, for example, to Pakistan, and then on from there to North Korea, and at least the technology on to Iran and Libya, although neither of them ever made weapons out of it. Um,
Hmm.
So quite a bit about that, a little, nuclear smuggling stuff and black market stuff, I think is in there. And I think that, by the time people read all the way through it, they'll probably be annoyed at me because I'm in every interview, right? So they probably won't like me anymore by the end of the thing. But they
Well,
will
I
have,
think it was great, actually.
well, thank you. But they'll have a pretty good handle on everybody's nukes and everybody's nuclear posture, essentially where we are in the world, where the treaties stand. Um,
Hmm.
and the immense power of the weapons themselves and the danger that they represent. I think it does sound to the average ear, certainly the average American ear, like it's just feminine and defeatist to say we should be against nuclear weapons. You might as well just let China take over your capital city. And the thing is that, like, nah, that's not really true. In fact, what's utopian probably is the idea that we can have this Mexican standoff where that's where all sides, like in a bar fight, everybody pulls a gun and everybody's holding a gun to
Yeah.
everybody else's head. And now everybody
Mhm.
freezes and nobody knows what to do. Nobody can fire first, or all the guns are going to go off. And
Right.
everybody, so what do we do? And then the idea is we're going to maintain this permanent Mexican standoff with thermonuclear hydrogen bombs for the next, I don't know, 100 years, 200 years. This is how
Mhm.
we're going to go on as humanity for the
Mhm.
indefinite future. It just makes no sense. There's got to
Mhm.
be a better way to do it. And I reject the idea that we should have a world government because look at what happens when America tries to be the world government. Of course, we
Well, no kidding.
war against people who won't give in to us all the time.
Right.
So you just can't have a monopoly on nuclear weapons. So what we need to do is general disarmament. And I think even in the book, we talk about how there are very non-utopian ways of going about this. In
Right.
fact, Trump just proposed maybe we could get into a treaty with Russia where we get down to about China level and
Hmm.
China agrees to stay where they're at. For people who don't know, America and Russia have about 7,000 each and
Right.
about 1,500 deployed or so, 2,000.
Hmm.
The Chinese have like a few hundred and counting. They're now expanding their nuclear weapon supply right
Right.
now, about 2 to 300. Now they're building up higher than that. Trump is saying, wait a minute, what if we all just stopped at about 200? I mean, that
Hmm.
is utopian enough. I'll take it. Let's start with
Oh
that.
yeah. Oh
Be
yeah.
fine. And Ronald Reagan said the same thing. Ronald
Hmm.
Reagan said, just like only Nixon can go to China, right? Walter Mondale can't go to China. It takes, or to Moscow. It takes Ronald Reagan to be able to end the Cold War. It takes Ronald
Right.
Reagan, George Bush Sr. to be able to dismantle tens of thousands of
Hmm.
weapons and do it with a straight face and
Right.
with an assurance that, yes, they are still concerned with American security. This is protecting American security. So then let's
Right.
get down to just a few. And
Yeah.
it, go ahead.
Or even, yeah, or even more, or do the British and the French. They have each of them have four boomers. They're about 200 warheads for all in. That's more than enough. These things are almost invisible. And get rid of the land-based stuff because that makes puts you in a use it or lose it scenario, which is far more escalatory. Not to mention, well, lays waste in prime farmland.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is not a no big deal situation, right? Like we need
Mhm.
that farmland for eating. Um, and Dr. Paul has said that look, we could defend this country with a couple of good submarines, and
Well,
that
just
sounds
it.
yeah, it sounds like hyperbole to say that, and he's kind of making a point. He said that in 2008 to the Washington Post, but um, the thing is, there are 200 nuclear bombs on an American nuclear submarine. On our Trident subs, they carry,
Yeah.
I forgot all of the math, but they have so many rockets with multiple reentry vehicles on them that you
Yeah.
can have as many as 200 nuclear bombs, enough to
Hmm.
kill all of Russia with
Right.
just one American sub. So, in other words, with torpedoes, they can sink any offensive naval fleet trying to come and land on our beaches. Yeah, right. And
Mhm.
with nukes, they can deter any major power that don't you mess with us or we'll mess with you right back. And we could have peace and security here
Well,
for
yeah, because it's vice versa. Basically much the same with the French submarines and the Triumph, and of course the British Vanguards, which are Trident subs, and the Russian ones, Aquila. Anyways, and of course the Chinese are building that. Yeah, four subs each. Basically, is more than enough because you can have two on patrol at any given time. Yeah.
sure. And
Mhm.
and look, I mean, I would rather we have fewer than that. That's probably enough to still cause nuclear winter and kill.
True. Yeah. So okay, two subs then, one on patrol and one.
You know, I talked with this brilliant guy named Lyle
Mhm.
Goldstein, who's
Hmm.
an analyst at the Naval War College. He's now at Defense Priorities. He's a brilliant genius. I wish he was the national security advisor or something. He's really
Hmm.
um and I was saying, listen, how about we just get rid of the H bombs and we have just atom bombs, And he's like, no, no, no. That's counterintuitively the wrong thinking, man, because that makes them more usable. They're too small, they're too easy to use. What we want to have is only a handful of multi-megaton city killers or high kiloton city killers
Hmm.
so that to truly hold each other's capital cities at risk. Otherwise, um, if you just have a bunch of Hiroshima sized bombs, you will hear the militarists rationalize, hey, it's just, as Wesley Clark said, it's just another way to kill people. And, as long as we're only talking A bombs, yeah, we could use those in certain battlefield situations. And you could see that escalating to full scale war against each other's military bases and cities anyway. But
Right.
if you hold a few H bombs, that should be enough to just keep the peace. You don't want to use them. You want to not use them, but that's probably the best way to not use them is have a few extremely large ones. Um,
Hmm.
for game theory's sake, which is just insane if he's really right about that, and it makes sense, I guess, if you do the equation or whatever, if you're Albert Wohlstetter and you game it all out. But
Hmm.
think about what that really means, though, right? That we're threatening to kill millions of innocent civilians in order to stop war from breaking out. Again, there's just got to be a better way than that. You know what I mean? There just has to
Yeah.
be.
Hmm. No, there has to be. I mean, I got grandkids, man. I don't want them to die this way, or have to eke out a living in the radiated rubble of, Vancouver. So, it's just, yeah, it's just horrific. We don't want to go down that dark path.
Yeah, Trump said people, we need to do this treaty. Um, People ignore nuclear weapons. They don't want to talk about the potential effect of nuclear weapons because he said it's just too depressing. And the thing is, like, yeah, actually, that's really right. They will
Yeah,
go. You can listen to Washington, D.C. blather on about who we got to bomb and who we got to sanction and what we're going to do as
yeah.
though nukes don't exist. You could listen to them talk for 20 years and they won't even mention nuclear weapons at all.
Hmm.
Wesley Clark, again, I'm picking on him because he had a chance to stick up for himself to me. Not
Hmm.
exactly on these quotes, but um, on his thing of well, first of all, as I was saying, where he said it's just another way to kill people. And then I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought of what I was going to say about him. Second thing about him. Um, I'm sorry, forgive me. Um, Wesley Clark. I got so many different things I want to say to criticize that guy, and I lost one in the shuffle there. Usable nukes. Well, I already said the one quote. I'm sorry, I can't remember what it was.
Oh, anyways, it may come back or not, but
Yeah,
anyways, keep
yeah, maybe
going.
about that. Um, hmm, I don't know. Nice question.
Okay, given all these, doing the book and basically everything we've talked about so far, is there anything, what are the key points you got from all those podcast interviews as you assembled them into this book? What sort of came to your mind like, oh, wow. Well, you mentioned a few things, about you know, but
Well,
is there anything interesting that you haven't mentioned that just sort of came to mind that you think the world should know?
sure. Well, I remembered what I was just going to say, which was Wesley Clark saying, we can't allow ourselves to be self deterred by the fact that they are in possession of all these H bombs, which it's weird that he added the whole self and hyphen thing on there. He just meant we can't allow ourselves to be deterred. But why
Hmm.
not? Like, that's the whole point of nukes. And supposedly, this mutually assured destruction stance, where we both still possess 7,000 nukes each, America and the
Yeah,
Russian Federation, to
yeah,
keep each other from doing the kinds of crazy things that might get to the point where they start going off. But
right.
to hear him describe it, no, you're not supposed to consider that. You're not
Hmm.
supposed to allow their possession of H bombs to enter into your equation, or that's cowardice. That's giving in. That's appeasement and weakness before Hitler or whatever. And so, as he put it, oh, come on. It's just another way to kill people. We can't allow ourselves to be self deterred by the threat of Russian nuclear war. Even though, of
Hmm.
course, like they're gambling everything. They're gambling
Oh,
the
yeah.
future of everything that all of our civilizations have built over thousands of years. Um, and it's over what? Over the who controls the coal basin in
Yeah.
eastern Ukraine? You got to be
Yeah.
kidding. You
No
know,
kidding. Yeah.
it's completely ridiculous. One
Actually,
thing maybe I could have started with this one. When you asked, like, what did I learn? I mean, I think I knew this pretty early on, but I really learned a lot about it now. And I have a collection of quotes that I've gotten from all different sources that I have
hmm.
compiled. And people can find this at the Libertarian Institute. Who
Hmm.
opposed nuking Japan? And it turns out almost everybody in
Yeah.
position of military authority was against nuking Japan at the time. And
Right.
most
I
people
did
just
a video on
like,
that.
yeah, that General Eisenhower and General MacArthur were against it. Admiral Nimitz was against it. Admiral Leahy and
Yep.
Hap Arnold, who was the
Hmm.
commander of the Army Air Force in the region, and all
Hmm.
guys said, and even Curtis LeMay,
Yep.
Robert McNamara, who
Hmm.
under him, said it was all unnecessary. We shouldn't have done it. It was a horrible war crime. It was
Hmm.
against their religion to do such a thing. All of these things. It was just Truman and Stimson and what's his name? I'm sorry, the Secretary of State, who was such a hawk. Um,
Um,
Stimson, the Secretary of War, and uh, oh, it's right on the tip of my tongue. I can picture his stupid face.
mm,
Uh, I'm sorry. Anyway, Truman's Secretary of State, I believe, was
mhm,
also, and it was like the three of them against the wishes of all these guys. And so people, if you
mhm.
oppose nuke in Japan here in America, people go, you gay, homo, commie, simp,
Yeah.
American hating. And then you go, no, 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 listen, that's what General Eisenhower thought. And that's what General MacArthur thought. That's
Right.
what Admiral Leahy and Admiral Nimitz said too.
Right.
What? Nimitz said that? MacArthur said that? And you go, yeah, MacArthur said it with conviction. MacArthur,
Hmm.
like, supposedly, I think, according to the pilot, his personal pilot, he just went on and on and on, was just distraught about it. Couldn't
Right.
stand that they had done it. Eisenhower had told them not to do it before they did it. They came and asked him, and he said, this is not how we were taught to make war. Kill cities full of women and children like this. Of course,
Right.
he supervised the carpet bombing of German cities as well, but
Yeah.
still. Um, but that to me is very telling, and I think it serves, it's a tired old metaphor now, the Matrix. You take the red pill or the blue pill. Uh,
Right.
right, in the blue pill, you stay in your false reality, and the red pill, you
Hmm.
kind of wake up and realize that things are a bit different than they told you before. Well, here are
Hmm.
a bunch of extremely broad-chested, tough guy medallion,
Hmm.
ornamented American warriors of the highest class of our worst
Hmm.
war, including our five-star generals who
Hmm.
said we shouldn't be doing this. We should
Right.
not. And so when you tell people that, they go, wow, I didn't know that. I really didn't know that. I've seen people in real life and on the internet too just be absolutely shocked and have to rethink the whole thing. And
Right.
if you Google that list, I have the list. Again, it's who opposed nuking Japan at the Libertarian Institute.
Yeah.
It's a long list. And
Oh,
you go,
yeah.
even if you and I already know this stuff, we start reading that list and go, wow, it's actually really impressive how many of America's highest ranking military leaders in that time at the end of the war said, tried even to stop it and certainly advised against it and then
Right.
lamented it after the fact and the rest
Hmm.
of that. It's really something to see.
Oh, yeah. And the 1946 U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, the official document, also says the same.
Right.
So they did a study and said, no, this was totally unnecessary, and I did a video about that on Hiroshima and Nagasaki about that. And despite that, I still had people saying, attacking me for it. I said, I'm quoting your own people for God's sake, because I did the same, similar quotes to what you did, and a bombing surveys, and I've just some people just don't want to change their mind. They just want to just keep taking those blue pills.
Well, and they'll invoke this fourth grade nonsense about, oh, well, it saved a million lives. Oh, it saved a
Bollocks.
million lives. Like, first of all, the implication there, they're talking about GIs and they're talking about
Yeah.
trading women and children for GIs. And I know they're
Yep.
conscripts and it ain't fair, but still, you're talking about fighting men
Yeah.
versus women and children, blatant civilians without no olive green gear on
Mm-hmm.
at all. They
Mm-hmm.
are not part of this,
All right.
and so immediately they make that trade, and you're just supposed to kind of silently go, well, we are talking about Japanese women and children, not compared to our GIs. So
Mm-hmm.
somehow that's different. But then, what a ridiculous lie. Even if you assume the premise that America absolutely had to invade Tokyo on foot and take over all of Japan on foot, and that they would resist to the last man. The military didn't think that was going to cost a million men. They thought it was going to cost about 50,000. So they killed 150,000 civilians to save
Yeah.
50,000 GIs. Oh, that's a little different than in your phony math from a minute ago, everybody. You know what I mean? And they pushed that constantly. It was H.W. Bush, when he was the president, said 1 million men were saved. And it's just a blatant lie. Um,
Yeah, it is.
and of course, they never stop. They would never stop, even, I guess, if you put a gun to their head and question the premise of whether you needed to invade the home islands at all. Maybe you didn't. Maybe they were completely under siege. And the threat, of course, as we know, and as they wrote and admitted at the time, um, the point of it was to get them to try to surrender to us before the Soviets got there, while at the
Hmm.
same time impressing the Soviets that check out this new weapon we got. Remember that weapon I told you we had? Well, this
Yeah,
is it. Check out how big it is.
exactly.
And so that was a big part of it. And so, but people will just rationalize and say, oh, yeah, we'd all be speaking Japanese right now or
Yeah.
whatever. It would have cost 10 million men. You'll hear people go just make up insane, whatever numbers that it would have
Hmm.
taken to, I guess, fight every last woman with a spear on the home island. When, of
Hmm.
course, um, and even the Japanese said, all the official history says, and I interviewed Gar Alperovitz, who wrote the book about this and stuff as well. And
Hmm.
that interview is in the book where he explains that it wasn't the nuking of the cities that caused their surrender. They
No.
surrendered on the 9th because the USSR had
Hmm.
declared that they were coming on the 8th, and
Yeah.
or pardon me, on the 7th, I guess, the day after Hiroshima. And even Truman had written in his diary, Stalin invades, Finny Japs, meaning
Hmm.
they're done now and they know it and I know it and the war is over, not because we nuked them, but because the Soviets are coming. And the
Right.
Japanese said, geez, you know what? We'd rather be ruled by MacArthur than
Hmm.
whoever Joe Stalin's going to
Right.
appoint to
No
run the
kidding. Yeah.
place. Yep.
Yeah, nobody's aware of that. The destruction of the Manchurian army the Japanese had there was the decisive thing. They lost almost 1 million men there. It was horrific. If you sort of read what happened to them. Not to mention, I remember, I think that Nimitz said his intelligence indicated that Japan was so close to economic collapse it would be functionally incapable of further warfare from September of 45 on. They would have to
Right.
surrender because they could not make it through the winter because they had no resources left. They're being hungry, out of fuel. They're going to be cold and hungry, and they're incapable of anything.
There's this great article by a guy named Josiah Lippincott at the American Conservative Magazine
Hmm.
about how they didn't need to do Iwo Jima and they didn't need to do, I'm sorry, I forget the name of the two major island campaigns that they did
Okinawa
before.
and Iwo Jima.
Uh, I don't remember them all. I'd have to go back before I like
Hmm.
confirm which what, but it
Hmm.
was it was certainly Iwo Jima was one of them. And the point is, they could have just sailed right past them all. There was no
Hmm.
Japanese Navy to deal with. The men who were stranded on those islands were essentially stranded, or maybe they had one ship there protecting them. We could have taken out one ship, and their men would have just been stranded there with no way to pose any sort of threat to us whatsoever. We could have sailed right past them and saved all those men. And he describes it's just a government program, a stupid war, right? Like
Yeah.
people, there's this huge mythology about World War II, but then you read Joseph Heller and you're like, oh,
Hmm.
I get it. It's just a government program. That's a satire, but that's why it's
Hmm.
funny is because it's true. You know,
Yeah.
what happened was they just had this meeting where these three men in their like public choice theory, like battle
Hmm.
of egos in the room said, well, I want to do this and you want to do that. And I guess it was MacArthur and Nimitz and somebody else. And they, or maybe it was just Nimitz and some other admiral, I forget. And they
Hmm.
made this compromise. Yeah, I don't think this was MacArthur because MacArthur was on his northern campaign and they were on their southern campaign or whatever. So it was the Navy, but it was I guess it was Nimitz and some other guy. And anyway, everybody could check my facts. It's a
Hmm.
Lippincott at the American Conservative Magazine. And
Hmm.
essentially they just said like whatever, they might as well have been playing a game of cards. I'm like, okay, fine, you win, we'll go to Iwo Jima. Right, where it was like completely stupid and they didn't need to do it. It was just like based on like a compromise between different plans of what they wanted to do, and well, let's just go to
Hmm.
these places instead. And it's just totally unnecessary slaughter there.
Well,
Where once the emperor surrendered, all he had to do was like get word to those people, and they would have surrendered peacefully.
well, yeah,
They didn't have to because they
yeah.
were stranded there. They couldn't do anything anyway. Were they going to
Hmm.
swim out to the to get us?
Well, yeah, because the last viable Japanese naval force was destroyed in the Battle of the Leyte Gulf. Where they took out the rest of the carriers and stuff. Would it have been Saipan was the other island, maybe? Iwo and Saipan.
Quite possibly.
Hmm.
I can picture it because they had on the
Hmm.
I watched a thing about the island campaigns shortly after that. So I have like some
Yeah.
pictures in my head of the way that they described this
Mhm.
island fight, but I'm afraid I don't remember for sure
Yeah.
which
Okay. Fair
was
enough.
which.
Yeah.
But
Fair enough. Okay. Sorry, I interrupted.
I am not really a great historian of World War II. I would very much like to be, but there's
Hmm.
only so much time in the day, you know. But
Hmm.
I'd love to sit down and read 200 books about it someday, you know.
Hmm. Okay. Any other points that came
Well,
that you?
I guess I would say like for people not too familiar, the basic theory of the hydrogen bomb for people to understand is, you know, you hear about uranium and plutonium, the
Hmm.
the smaller atom bombs in the low kiloton range. Those are essentially fission bombs. It's uranium or plutonium atoms split
Hmm.
in reaction that releases all this energy.
Hmm.
Thing with what they called then the super, the H bomb, as Daniel Ellsberg liked to put it, uh, we use essentially like a Nagasaki bomb, a plutonium implosion bomb,
Hmm.
as a blasting cap, the percussion
Hmm.
to set off an H bomb because it
Hmm.
has to be hotter, not just than the sun, but hotter than the center of the sun in
Hmm.
order to allow, or at least these get hotter than the center of the sun, in order to allow these hydrogen isotopes to then fuse together, two atoms, not splitting atoms, but fusing atoms
Hmm.
together. And when you do that, that's what releases this energy in the high kiloton and even into the megaton range. The biggest one
Right.
tested 50 megatons. And what we're talking about, if people are familiar, you know, Americans are familiar with these megalopolises that we have, these massive
Hmm.
spread out cities like Los Angeles, Houston, Dallas, um, or like maybe South Florida or something like that. It would just take a couple of these to kill tens of millions of people and render these entire cities inhabitable forever. Um, it would take, you know, one or two or three or four nukes to just destroy all of Dallas.
Hmm.
Um, and and so you would have in the event of a real war between America and Russia, the estimates are that we would have a World War II worth of casualties. Approximately 60 million people would be killed within the first 45 minutes.
Well, yeah,
That
literally.
would be the start of the war. And and in the end, this is the other thing you mentioned, the use them or lose them principle. Because we have so many of these land-based missiles and all this, essentially every war game leads to general war. There's no way
Yep.
to really put a cork in the bottle once major powers particularly start throwing H bombs around. It's essentially on. And at that point, we lose every major city in North America and Europe, Russia,
Hmm.
probably China as well. The
Hmm.
rest of humanity, you know, a couple of billion of them starve because of the lower temperatures and all the failed crops. And then the whatever, you know,
Yeah.
hundreds of millions or tens of millions who survive get to start over. Only set back a couple thousand years from everything that's been achieved by mankind so far since
Hmm.
falling out of the grasslands there. So it's just it's the most ridiculous thing. It's the most kind of wild paradox that you could imagine that
Oh,
this
I
is
know.
the peace on this planet is with this threat of absolute ultimate destruction beyond imagination. Um,
Hmm.
there's got to be a better way to do it. And I guess frankly, like we need conservative leaders and capitalist leaders and patriotic, you know, America firster and Canada firster leaders to say,
Well, world for survival of the human race first, or
yeah,
humanity
but you
first,
know,
or in that sense.
like I say though, you know, once you say abolish nuclear weapons, just people immediately they start thinking of like 1960s hippie songs and dirt weed,
Hmm.
like, you know, everyone ride on the peace train, a bunch of 20-year-olds telling everybody that it's going to be great if we just listen to them and their stupid
Hmm.
music, right? Like that's what people think. They just dismiss it. But you know, like so then it's important to say, guess what? George Shultz and Henry Kissinger and William Perry and all of these secretaries of state and secretaries of war and national security advisors
Yeah.
and former leaders of strategic air command, these people created a group called Global Zero The premise of which is we got to get rid of these machines before our politicians start using them. Why would Henry
Mhm.
Kissinger say that? It ain't because he's such a loving guy, right? It ain't 'cause he's a dove and a
No,
wimp and a peacenik and a utopian.
no,
Because he's saying, oh man, you know what? Before I'm dead, I really ought to let everyone know that we don't have to just accept this permanent status quo, right? Like he didn't do anything really to save us when it was his
Mhm.
turn. But same thing for George Shultz. That was Ronald Reagan's guy, George
Mhm.
Shultz. And so you could say lots of things about George Shultz, but you can't say he's a wimp and you can't say that he's not a
No.
patriot. You know what I mean? So why would he be against nuclear weapons? It's because he's smart. It's because he really thought this through in a way that some of these other people have not. Same thing with Bill Clinton's Secretary of Defense, William Perry, who wrote a whole book about it, My Life on the Nuclear Brink, and said we got
Mhm.
to. And he was not any kind of partisan Democrat. He was a wonk, a
Mhm.
civilian engineer and scientist who worked for the
Mhm.
Pentagon and just worked his
Right.
way up to Secretary of Defense, right? Um,
Right.
and so, like, he was never any kind of Democratic politician from out in the country. Like, he's literally just a weapons scientist, right?
Yeah.
And then he's saying, listen, I don't know if you know how these machines work or not, but I'm telling you, when you fuse these hydrogen isotopes together, things get really destructive. And you don't want to trust these human men with this much power. It's just, it's too big of a mistake to make. A guy like that, he only says stuff like that because he's right. Otherwise,
Oh.
he wouldn't have gone that far. He would have said, well, nukes aren't that bad, but that's not what he said. What he said was like, hey, everybody, I'm going to die soon. But before I do, I want you to know you got to do something about this problem I helped create for you. Good luck. Sayonara. So, I mean, if that's where they're coming from, again, I mentioned only Nixon can go to China, only Reagan and Bush can end the Cold War. Maybe only Trump can
Mhm.
severely curtail or even abolish nuclear weapons. One thing
Mhm.
about Trump, there are a lot of things about Trump, okay? But one thing about him is he had an uncle who was a scientist at MIT. He likes to tell the stories like my uncle, he is the smartest scientist who ever lived.
Mhm.
And he worked at MIT, where it was the
Mhm.
smartest engineering and scientific community that ever existed. And they were so tall and rich and wealthy and handsome and smart and forward looking. And you know what my brilliant genius scientist uncle told me? He said, Donald, these H bombs are really dangerous. Let me show you. And this guy taught Donald Trump all about nuclear weapons in a way
Mhm.
that, like, look, the average goofball in Washington just doesn't get that kind of education. They know
Right.
of nuclear weapons. It's not like they've never heard of them before, but they never had their brilliant genius scientist uncle at MIT sit them down and go, look, man, this many megatons equals this many dead people. And you know me, I'm your Uncle Jimmy telling you this
Mhm.
stuff. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Donald Trump's uncle did that for him. And
Yeah.
so, you know what I mean? Like there's a unique level of education, a unique perspective that he holds there that the
Mhm.
average cookie cutter goofball politician up there just doesn't have. And
Sure.
he talks about it all the time. He mentions that he's mentioned it a bunch of times. And
Mhm.
so, I'm not, how do you split the difference between hopeful and optimistic, when you're dealing with stuff like that, right? Oh, what do we got here? Oh, the effects of nuclear weapons. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
This goes into very great detail.
yeah. So he understands that stuff in a way that I think most of them don't. And so I don't want to
Mhm.
get like too carried away and like predict that he's gonna get rid of them all for us. But he was really bad in his first term on this stuff. He tore up the INF treaty
Mhm.
at the behest of the military, which was a really unfortunate thing. He also tore up the Open Skies Treaty and he threatened New START, which is the last treaty
Mhm.
limiting H bombs and three-stage intercontinental ballistic missiles,
Right.
which is extremely dangerous. But then he turns around, he says, now he goes, I want, and he did talk about this then, although it sounded more like BS then. Um, he certainly didn't sound like he had the follow through. Here he sounds
Mhm.
really serious. He says he wants a new treaty with America, Russia, and China together. And then, but he goes, look, I understand that America and Russia have way more nukes than China does. I want to get us down to where they are and get them to stop.
Right.
Yeah, that all humanity ought to be behind that. Can I get 8 billion people to just say, yeah, that's what we all agree on? That's what we
Mhm.
all agree on.
Right.
America, Russia, China, let's stop at 300 each. And let's take a
Mhm.
breath and see where we are in 10 years. Okay? Fine. Let's do that. Who could
Hmm.
disagree with that? It
Only a
sounds
hardcore war hawk.
exactly. So look, there's real potential here, and we have a president who's interested in the subject, wants to
Hmm.
do something with it.
Hmm.
So there's potential for activism here as well for people who really want to do something about it, you know?
Right. Awesome. So, given all that, if we don't do anything to scale back, what do you think the odds are we are going to have a nuclear war, and how do you think that would play out?
Well, I think the odds are very low in any kind of short-term horizon.
Hmm.
Uh, Over the long term, it's essentially inevitable, right? Like you can't have
Right.
this many nuclear weapons around without eventually they're going to be used. It's just like a matter of probabilities and that kind of thing.
Hmm.
But I don't see any reason that anybody has to fight. For example,
Hmm.
the Ayatollah in Iran this whole time has decided not to try to make them, that he
Right.
thinks a latent deterrent. He's proven he knows his men have mastered the fuel cycle. They can enrich uranium to
Right.
weapons grade. I got bullets in one pocket, a revolver in the other. Let's not escalate this thing, okay? That's
Yeah.
his position so far. Let's just
Hmm.
leave it at that.
Hmm.
We have nothing to fight with China about. Like even if people are just so upset about the potential of violent conflict and the reabsorption of Taiwan by force
Hmm.
by China. Still, Taiwan's part of China, at least technically, mostly.
Oh
That's
yeah.
not at all the same thing as saying that they're an offensive threat to South Korea or Japan or Australia or
Well,
Vietnam, any of
especially
our other friends in the region.
especially given their history. I mean, the
Exactly.
last war they fought was in 1979. It was a limited war against China. I
Yeah.
mean, against Vietnam, but that's
Yeah.
it. They haven't fought a war since then.
Right. And they have no interest in I don't believe they have any interest in carrying on. You know, people say that the Belt and Road Initiative is a secret plan to invade all of Central Asia. And it's like, look, if they're going to build a Belt and Road across Asia, they're going to have to kiss everybody's ass the whole time, or it's going to get blowed up, right? Like there are bad lands out there in Tajikistan. Those
Yeah.
guys, somebody's going to have to corral those guys. There's going to have to be
Hmm.
consensus if you're going to build through that territory, you know? So, they can only be so belligerent, I think.
Hmm.
And they make fun of us explicitly sometimes for this in the United States. Oh
Hmm.
yeah, sure, we want to do exactly what you guys have been doing, which is, completely destroy our own society, trying to conquer the rest of the planet and everybody else's society. And they play hardball. They make investments, and they are tough guys in business. You can ask the African
Hmm.
nations where they've made inroads there, but they don't bring in their troops to enforce it. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Threaten to withhold that money they were paying,
Hmm.
you know,
Hmm.
and make things difficult. So, um, so there's just no reason in the world, even over the next 100 years, whatever, that we got to fight China. We just
No,
don't.
I agree with you on that.
And then same thing
Absolutely.
for all of Europe. They're our friends. Look, it used to be that the Russians were the Soviet communists, but that's
Hmm.
different and over now. You know, they
Yeah.
demonize Vladimir Putin, and he's a strong man and an autocrat, and he'll cut a throat when he needs to cut a throat. There's no question about that. But like on the political spectrum, where is he? He's a center right conservative Republican, essentially. I mean, he doesn't stand for election that often, but like he's also not declared himself the czar and
Yeah.
the dictator. He when he dies, he's leaving something like a constitutional government behind,
Yeah.
which is, to his half credit, whatever. Just I'm not like saying nice things about him. I'm just saying like the reality of his power is he's essentially a center right conservative Christian Republican. And
Hmm.
so that's not an alien civilization that must be kept at bay at all costs. Like quite frankly, worst case scenario, they reabsorb Estonia. I don't care. I don't consider it to be like a portent of a world revolution that's going to enslave me and my family here in North America or even our friends in Western Europe under totalitarian slavery.
Hmm.
And, in fact, even if they took all of Ukraine, it still ain't Soviet communism. even if
No,
it
it's
was
not.
a brutal Russian military occupation. It still ain't the same as the government owning every scrap of everything the way it was in the bad old days under the commies. It
Hmm.
really was the nightmare that anti-communists described. You can't embellish it. It was absolutely out of control. The people
True.
lived in terror. But that's all over. That was 35
Right.
years ago. So,
Yeah, they're a free market economy. The one big thing which probably annoys a lot of the woke folk in the West is they are conservative Christian society with strong family values, and they want to keep it that way. Thank you very much.
yeah, I think that's part of what they hated about, when Trump was gone for 4 years,
Hmm.
became their avatar for Trump. They need somebody on the right to hate, and so they just like switched. They were already upset at Putin, but then once when Trump was gone for a little while, they just transferred all of their dad issues or whatever their problem is onto this guy. And there's a lot of that, right? Like
Yeah.
it's there's some weird themes in American foreign policy. I'll tell you what, especially
Well,
on the
yeah.
Democratic side.
Yeah,
But
it's pity it's pity that the government of the United States have long since forgotten George Washington's advice about avoiding foreign entanglements
right,
and alliances, and
that's
so
true. Although I think people they're remembering now, like it,
you
there's the promises of peace. George W. Bush, 25 years ago, George W. Bush goes, we should have a humble foreign policy, and then he broke that. But
know.
Donald Trump has said a lot more than that.
Hmm.
Donald Trump, in so many words, told his people, we're not fighting any wars for the next 4 years at least. Right?
Hmm.
So they're going to hold him to that. And he
Hmm.
wants to make a bunch of exceptions for a bunch of reasons. They're going to be pissed. We already saw a huge backlash
Hmm.
on right wing Twitter against all of his BS about taking over in Palestine. And they're just
Hmm.
revolting against it. That is not at all why they supported him. And they're
Hmm.
saying it loudly. And so,
Hmm.
um, there is, I think, I don't know how to measure it exactly, but I bet you it's a super majority of Republican voters this time who do not want to fight. They don't want to fight China. They don't want to fight Iran. They sure as hell don't want to fight Russia. And they don't
Hmm.
want to fight all of Israel's battles in the Middle East either. Iran
Right.
can do that, but they don't want anything to do with that stuff. And so the war party's in a tough position, but I think, the anti-war party now is our chance. This is the best time that we got because again, you know, liberals couldn't do it if they wanted to. It has to be Republicans really to make peace. And you see where liberals don't even want to because they're so afraid of being called weak and feminine and
Mm.
compromisers. They always say, no, we got to be muscular. We got to be more hawkish than the Republicans and call them anti-American for not being hawkish enough to prove what, wimpy peaceniks we're not. And they're just so stuck to that narrative. They can't be broken out of it. So it takes like a, fake macho tough guy like Trump to say,
Hmm.
well, I'm not afraid of no Ayatollah. How about I just make a deal with him?
Hmm.
Right? That's
Right.
the dynamic that we need to play up. And so
Hmm.
that's, we do have a real opportunity here. And already with it's not everything, but it's a huge step, this jihad going
Right.
on against US aid right now that they're doing. I mean, US aid is the heart of American imperial soft power throughout the
Well,
planet.
absolutely. Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
it's a major blow to the empire to
Hmm.
disrupt all of that. And I mean, Trump fired. I saw the headline yesterday. He fired 10,000 employees of
Yeah.
USAID. Beat it.
Yeah.
Go get a real job. Kept 200 of them and moved them over to the State Department. I don't
Right.
know what they're going to be doing. It's not,
Hmm.
but man, it's almost. I mean, that is just huge. And so, um, I know a lot of liberals are kind of reacting against that. I was on a TV show on the Pierce Morgan show where the liberal was saying, "Oh yeah, well what about the Pentagon? That's bigger and worse." And it's like, "Yeah, but just say the Pentagon too, not the Pentagon instead." You know what I mean? Don't ridicule what they're doing against USA because the dollar totals aren't that high. This is extremely, effective and widespread intervention throughout the planet. So
Right.
liberals ought to be saying, man, you MAGA guys sure are right about US aid. Now let's
Mhm.
talk about the Department of the Army, man. It's the
Mhm.
same kind of thing, only way, way worse. You know what we could do? We could abolish the CIA. There's an
Oh, yeah.
agency we could do without. You
Oh,
want to talk
no
about
kidding.
interfering in other people's media and other people's elections and other people's business where we shouldn't and causing blowback for the American people. That and everybody already knows it. What are people afraid to say? Let's go ahead and
Mhm.
say, get rid of the
Mhm.
CIA. Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was, I don't think he was officially a neocon, but he was a hawk and he was very close to the neocons, hardcore
Right.
anti-Soviet hawk Democrat, Truman Democrat type. And as soon as the
Yeah.
Cold War was over, he's like, who needs the empire? I think we should abolish the Pentagon and the CIA and all this stuff. We can go back to having
Right.
a department of the army or a department of war like it was
Yeah.
back in the day, and then we just mind our own business. Who needs a CIA with no Soviet Union out there to fight? And
Right.
that's like, again, I invoke Moynihan because like this is a hawk speaking, right? It's
Mhm.
if the Hawks say, just like I say about Henry Kissinger, if Henry Kissinger says maybe we need to get rid of nuclear weapons, well, maybe we need to at least think about it. You know what I mean? Maybe we need to at least
Mhm.
consider what he was saying there. It's the
Well,
same kind of,
absolutely.
yeah. When militarists are saying we're going too far, we maybe should take it from them.
Mhm.
Like there are limits to what we can do and how far we can push things.
Mhm. Well, yeah, and then divert the funds to make America great in the sense of just putting into crumbling infrastructure, into education, into healthcare,
Base.
good stuff.
Yeah. Let us keep our own money and educate our own kids.
Hmm.
Yep. I'm with you. And look, I think more and more people, that's how they feel about it.
Hmm.
I know
Hmm.
I'm trying to remember oh, I think it was Dave Smith on election night did a big panel with Patrick Bet David and
Hmm.
he said a bunch of anti-war stuff that was good about the Ukraine war.
Hmm.
The next guy goes, "Yeah, and that's our money and we can't afford it." And the crowd went wild.
Hmm.
Like they really don't know a whole lot about Ukraine, Russia, this, that. But what they really respond to is you're telling me that in the economic distress that me and my family and my friends and my business and my community are going through, homeless people living in the woods all over the place,
Hmm.
that you're telling me that somehow we can afford to overthrow the whole world and remake it better to our government's liking? Like, no, man, screw you. Like, literally, that's our money. Uh,
Hmm.
I'm a libertarian and I'm against any kind of government, really anything. I'd like to get rid of any handouts to anybody, but it's like when the hurricane comes and hits North Carolina,
Hmm.
and they're literally it's the most militarized or second most militarized state in the union. You got Fort Bragg right there, like line of sight for
Hmm.
disaster victims, but their helicopters ain't coming. They're not
Yeah.
coming. They're not here for your defense. Those helicopters are literally on their way to reinforce Israel's position against Iran,
Right.
6,000 miles away. And so kiss your ass goodbye. Screw you, people of North Carolina. But meanwhile, that was their money in the first place. It's not welfare to them, it's their
No.
money that the government is taking away from them that they cannot use to protect themselves and their families, to rebuild, to do anything. Because the government
Right.
takes that money and spends it on a Black Hawk and then sends that Black Hawk overseas to do Benjamin Netanyahu's bidding instead of
Hmm.
theirs. And it becomes too blatant. It becomes too stark that it's
Hmm.
not that we have helicopters and they have helicopters. It's that they have our helicopters and we have none right when
Hmm.
we really need them. And it
Right.
ain't fair. How could anyone think that this is fair? Glenn Greenwald is a great Israel critic and
Hmm.
always points out that the average standard of living in Israel is higher than in the United States. And
Because of the
many
money.
people in Israel have a much higher standard of living than people in
Yes.
the United States. We got one homeless person while they got one billionaire, but we got to pay them at all. It's completely crazy. Screw them. Let them pay their own way in the world. We have our own problems. But the reality is this: the people in charge of our government, and particularly the Zionists in charge of our foreign policy, they don't care about us at all. They don't care about people sleeping in the woods at all. If those people are sleeping in the woods, it's because they're losers and scum and white trash, horrible people who deserve to starve anyway. They
Hmm.
hate us. They hate
Hmm.
us. They don't care what happens to us at all. They would just as soon confiscate more of our wealth so we'll die sooner, so we'll stop whining, so they can
Hmm.
send more of our
Right.
money to Israel instead.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I definitely. But let's try and circle back to the nuclear topic.
Okay.
'Cause I certainly agree with you on a lot of
Israel's
that
got
stuff.
nukes that they stole from America and
Oh
that they
yeah.
still don't admit they have.
Absolutely, no kidding. So, as we're still kind of winding up, as we've been talking now for a while, is there any final things you want to say related to the topic of nuclear war, nuclear disarmament? Do you think my readership, my viewership should know?
Well, I think one interesting story that's in there is about North Korea and how really
Hmm.
it was George W. Bush and John Bolton who virtually forced them to get nuclear weapons. And this
Hmm.
was in the fall of 2002 when everybody was paying attention to the run up to war with Iraq.
Hmm.
What happened was John Bolton tore up the agreed framework deal based on a lie that the North Koreans had a secret uranium enrichment program, which wasn't true.
Hmm.
Um, but based on that, they tore up the agreed framework deal that Bill Clinton had
Hmm.
signed. Then they passed a new bunch of sanctions. Oh, of course, at the beginning of the year, they called them part of the axis of evil with Iran and bin Laden and Iraq somehow.
Hmm.
Get this, Saddam Hussein and the Ayatollah and
Hmm.
Osama bin Laden and Kim Jong Il. Yeah, they're all this big Axis alliance against you. If you haven't heard a more ridiculous lie in your
No
entire
kidding. They
life,
hate
have
each
that one.
other's guts.
Yeah. Um, and so, um, and then they put them in the nuclear posture review and said maybe we'll hit them with a first strike. And it was only then that they withdrew from the nonproliferation treaty, kicked the IAEA inspectors out of the country, and
Hmm.
started making nuclear weapons, restarted their old Soviet era nuclear
Right.
reactor at Yongbyon, and started making nuclear weapons. And now they have a few dozen of them. And
Hmm.
even if we can make peace, even if Donald Trump does his absolute best and gets a real peace deal and ends the Korean War officially, we'll still almost certainly not get reunification, and it'll be virtually impossible to get them to abandon nuclear weapons now. And it, however, if you listen to W. Bush, whose fault it is, and Barack Obama and Joe Biden, the way to deal with North Korea is you tell them that they better surrender 100% and they better give up 100% of their nuclear weapons and they better shut down their nuclear reactor and they better bend down and kiss our feet and then we'll consider talking with them about anything else. Yeah, right. That'll never happen, and that's why it was absolutely wonderful and a brilliant and great stroke of diplomacy for
Hmm.
Donald Trump to throw that away and say no, we can't
Hmm.
with North Korea. And in fact, he had a good South Korean president to work with at the time,
Yeah.
who asked, "Please, will you let me try to fix this?" And Trump said, "Yeah, if it'll piss off my national security advisor, go ahead," he said, and the guy
Hmm.
got it going. Um, and then what could have been? It was John Bolton who helped ruin the deal too. But now we have another shot at Trump in there, and
Hmm.
so I guess I would just plead with people like when and if this happens at all, any diplomacy with North Korea, do everything you can to encourage it, everything you
Hmm.
can to let people know that there is consensus behind this. This is what the American people want. TV
Hmm.
says, "Oh no, Kim is a dictator. We can't deal with him." America supports dictators all over the world and everybody knows it. Don't give me
Oh,
that.
absolutely.
He's just not our guy yet. And I would say, what I would rather he's our guy than he's our enemy and a nuclear
Hmm.
threat. And
Yeah.
there's a great new book that people may have heard of by Annie Jacobson called Nuclear
Yeah.
War, which it's a fictional scenario where war breaks out between America and North Korea, and then the whole thing spirals out of control.
Right.
And other than Israel and potentially Iran, I guess. Other than forget that Iran ain't making news. Other than China, India, or India, Pakistan, this is probably the most, or maybe Eastern Europe now, NATO, Russia. This is the most likely potential flashpoint for nuclear war is
Hmm.
between North Korea and the United States and our allies in the Pacific. And like, let's just, you know what? There's no threat of nuclear war between America and Britain and America and France because we're friends. So let's
Right.
just be friends. You can have all the nukes you want. I don't care because we're pals now. Let's do it like
Right.
that. And we just have to. We have to do it. We can't just, especially when you're dealing with a country like that where there could be a military coup and you don't know who you're dealing with next and stuff like that. We just have to do whatever we can to put these things on a lower simmer wherever possible. And so I would urge people to put all their partisan feelings aside whenever they may come up and support good policies when they're available for supporting.
Amen to that, because the lives of our children and grandchildren depend on it.
Absolutely right.
Mhm. Well, thank you very much for your time. That was awesome. And just hold on for a second. I'm just going to pause the recording and then we can chat a bit on what happens next. There it is. Stop recording.